everybody. If we could kick off then. If we could start with apologies for absence. There haven't been any except for Rebecca Renison, obviously. Can I just say, as I said earlier, that I understand Rebecca's had a baby called Jack on the 5th of March, so congratulations to Rebecca. So if we just move on to declarations of interest. Are there any new declarations of interest for members, please, or declarations in relation to the agenda? I don't hear it, so I'll take that as a no. Can I consider the minutes of the meeting on the 14th of January? I won't go through them page by page, but is there anything anyone wishes to raise as a correction? I don't see anyone, so if you're happy, I'll now take that as a true record of the meeting. Thank you. Right, the next thing we got is the LCIV update, and we're welcoming Jacqueline Jackson. I don't see her, but I understand she's here.
Yeah.
And Jacqueline is going to present to us, I think we've allowed to look at this 15 minutes for this item, yeah? On the responsible investment position of the CIV. Okay, Jacqueline.
Sorry, Rob, it's Jason Fletcher here.
Hi, Jason. Do you want to introduce yourself, Jason?
Yeah, sorry, I will. Sorry, I'm Jason Fletcher, and I'm the CIO for the London CIV. I'll be speaking briefly later after Jacqueline. I'm not aware that Jacqueline's on the line yet, but I know she is trying to get on the line currently, so she will be with us in a second. It's just coming now.
Okay, brilliant.
So I'll carry on talking just for a couple of seconds and lead you into Jacqueline, if that's okay. So Jacqueline can just get ready. Is that okay?
That's fine. Yeah.
Sorry, a bit of a filler for that. So Jacqueline is our head of responsible investment. Has been with the firm for 7 or 8 months, and actually started just before me. But obviously, responsible investment has been very important to the London CIV, and certainly in how we're trying to develop it as it moves forward. So I'm hoping I can get the thumbs up from Jacqueline that she's ready, and she can present the slides, which I'm hoping Stephanie, who's also on the call, can get on the screen. If Stephanie, if you could try and do that, that would be great.
Will do.
Okay. Can I just say I won't do a round of introductions in the interest of timing, but if the first time anyone speaks, they could just say who they are. Yeah. Okay, please. So with that, Jacqueline. Welcome.
We've just got a message from Jacqueline saying her voice isn't working. I'm sorry about this.
Shall we move on to perhaps the renewables one first? Can we do that?
We'd have to go. We need to go.
Yeah, we're going to exempt, but are we able to do it?
We're fine from our side to do that, but I think you may need to sort out the exempt bit. We're happy to do that.
I will, but shall we do that then? While we're waiting for Jacqueline to sort out technology, yes. So if we could move on to item.
Hi.
Sorry.
I'm just letting you know I've dialed in with the audio on the phone.
Okay.
So you should have.
Stick with Jacqueline then.
Yeah, right. Do you want to go ahead then, Jacqueline? I mean, I don't know how we're going to do your presentation, but go on. Well done.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Great. So thank you.
Stephanie has got the presentation up for you, Jacqueline.
Great. So without any further ado.
Just want to introduce yourself again.
Stephanie.
Sorry.
Yes, my name is Jacqueline Jackson. I'm head of responsible investment at London CIV and joined in June. So already been here for 9 months now, and a lot's happened so far. What we thought would be useful for the time that we have today is to give an update on progress across the 6 priority areas which were agreed with the board this time last year, and they are the climate policy, stewardship policy, and all associated reporting, product offerings, which you'll hear about a bit later, and of course, capacity to deliver, culture and communications. And given the fact that we don't have too much time, what we thought we'd do is go into a little bit more detail on the two key areas, which are specifically climate and stewardship, to give you a bit of an idea of what we've been doing in terms of responsible investment on these areas. But obviously, if you want to go into more detail on any of the topics that we are working on, the presentation pack should give you a good overview of quite a bit more information than what we can cover with the time available. So if we can move on to the climate slide, Stephanie, I can give a quick overview on what we're doing on climate. So obviously we've rewritten and redefined our investment beliefs and principles, or at least expanded on them to provide a bit more detail. And I'm very happy to say that at least 5 of those specifically focus on responsible investment, and we have a dedicated investment belief on climate change risk itself. We have undertaken a climate data procurement, and we had now completed a climate risk analysis, which is in line with the TCFD guidelines, and that is expected to be in line with industry best practice, covering 91% of the holdings that we have within listed equity and fixed income so far. We've also done that risk analysis on sovereign debt, and we're doing an internal analysis at the moment on climate risk in certain infrastructure assets. So we've gone a bit above and beyond the traditional listed equities and fixed income footprinting, and we've moved into some slightly alternative asset classes as well. And we hope that this is an offering that we'll be able to provide to clients very soon as well. We're hoping to undertake a pilot of this approach in or around May or June this year, and we should be able to provide that for clients as standard from June or July this year. So great progress there. Obviously, we're a member of many different industry initiatives, specifically TCFD, PRI, Climate Action 100+. We're looking into net zero at the moment, so we should have a target on that this year, after a consultation with clients that will go out for several months over summer. And then we're starting to make use of the Transition Pathway Initiative as well. And then, of course, all of this is going to be coupled with better reporting on climate and a dedicated climate policy. All of these documents are in draft at the moment, and they should be ready to go out to clients review very soon. So you'll be able to see more of that in due course. And then if we just quickly click onto the next slide, and maybe the next slide again. This is just a bit of a screenshot, but essentially I thought it might be interesting just to highlight a couple of sneak preview key highlights of the risk analysis that we've undertaken. That we're obviously very pleased to let you know that the consolidated LSIV pool has lower carbon footprint than the MSCI World across all of the carbon intensity metrics that we use. And the consolidated pool also has a lower exposure to fossil fuels than the MSCI World, and lower coal exposure as well. The only bad news is that we're not obviously currently Paris aligned, and it's above the 3 degree threshold, but we are actually still lower than the benchmark. So there's quite a lot of work that's gone into this, and we're still doing quite a lot of work to understand the results and findings before we can communicate those a bit more extensively. But that is coming very soon, and something that we are going to be publicly disclosing in the very near term. And then if we just quickly move on for the last minute to stewardship, just to say that we, again, have undertaken quite a few industry collaborations on this. We're part of the Asset Owner Diversity Charter. We've been working on a couple of different share action projects, and we've defined recently a list of recommended stewardship priority themes for 2021, which cover a wide range of different issues that we think are going to be important, that are both financially and socially material for London CIV. But we're also undertaking voting and engagement procurement to help us to really drive real world outcomes and make sure that we are able to follow up with the work that we're doing, and rather than working through the fund managers, sort of to partner with them a bit better with a dedicated provider to help us really do more heavy lifting in this space as well. And of course, coupled with all of that is going to be an outcomes report, and of course, a stewardship and voting policy setting. So everything that we do is going to have a dedicated policy in terms of climate and stewardship, and with that outcomes reporting, which show how we're actually progressing year on year. So thank you. Sorry about the audio issues at the beginning, but I can hear you now if there's any questions.
Okay, is there any questions? Can I just say introduction? Of course, this is fun. I actually chair the Responsible Investment Reference Group for the CIV, which is a group of the shareholders that speaks to Jacqueline and her team. Has a meeting with Jacqueline and her team once a month to go through this sort of stuff here. And I just want to say that obviously there's been an immense sort of amount of work done in the CIV on responsible investment and carbon areas. If you remember, we had a meeting, I think here about 2 years ago with the LAC representative, and we discussed this and ended up writing a letter to the new chief executive of the CIV, Mike O'Donnell, with setting out our concerns about the lack of progress in this area up till then. And following that, I met him with Mark Ingleby from Lewis, who's the chair at Lewisham, and they put this program in, and they just as a huge. That was sort of. I'm sure we were pushing on an open door, but it was that meeting of this committee, our committee, was a fantastic sort of catalyst for getting all that going. So it's really pleased to see, a report back from Jacqueline who's now got a team of 2 people working with her on responsible investment and carbon areas in the CIV. So that's fantastic and welcome. Yeah, thank you. Right, sorry about that speech. So has anyone got any questions or comments they want to make on that? I know it's a bit of a whistle stop. Cam.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My name is Councillor Cam Adams. Thank you, Jacqueline. My question is, what is the most important element for us when we're considering a responsible investment? And my second question, I was just wondering if there's a trade-off between responsible investment and returns.
Does Polly want to ask her question, and then we'll come back all 3 of them, and then either of you can probably come back if you've got follow-ups. Polly?
Yeah, thanks. I'm concerned to hear that the investments in the London CIV, notwithstanding the fact that it's obviously improved from where it was, are still not Paris aligned and are aligned to above 3 degrees. I'm wondering what the timeline is to get them to be Paris aligned, bearing in mind we know how challenging it is to reallocate investments and how important it is for us to maintain our fiduciary duty. But our fiduciary duty includes making sure that we're not investing our members' money in stranded assets or increasing the risks to them and their communities of catastrophic climate change. So I'd really like to know what the timetable is to move from an above 3 degrees position on these investments to one that is Paris aligned, and what contributions the boroughs can make, the borough pension funds such as ours, to shaping that timetable and arguably accelerating it. Thank you.
Jacqueline, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, so I'll answer in order. So I think the first question really around what's the most important area is that I suppose at a completely umbrella level, obviously stewardship is really important because it helps us to engage in all areas and make progress. But if you're referring to sort of which theme and factors most important, I think we are really prioritising climate first. And the reason for that being it is the most evidenced financially material and socially material issue at the moment, which leads me on well to your second question, which is that does responsible investment sacrifice returns? And the answer is no. We think it we think it adds value, but we certainly know that it absolutely mitigates risk, and climate change risk specifically being the most financially and socially material is going to be a major priority area. We've looked specifically at the value at risk associated with transition risk, which is a way of understanding, what's the potential internalized cost associated with that climate footprint. And we hope to be able to do that for physical risk factors as well in the future. And to the point as well around target setting and when we can expect to be Paris aligned. Another really good question, but I just want to highlight again that whilst we're not already aligned, we are still significantly better than the benchmark. So we're sort of ahead of the curve in terms of sort of standard trajectories. But of course, the view to getting to a net zero target in the future would be first to achieve Paris alignment. And so because we've just undertaken the first climate risk analysis in detail across London CIV funds, we first need to analyse those results, which is happening right now. We'll then be setting a longer term net zero target, and we'll be able to advise on a shorter term Paris aligned target, which will be the short to medium term target that gets us to that eventual goal. So what will probably happen is that a recommendation should go out very soon to clients, or within the next 2 to 3 months, and there will be quite an extensive consultation period of about 3 months again for clients to look at our recommendation on targets and when we plan to get to where we want to get to. And we hope, therefore, we'll be able to make an announcement based on that client consultation and confirmation, still ahead of COP26 this year. So it's quite an ambitious timeline. We don't have the answer right now, but we're very much on the path to getting there.
Jason wants to come in, I think.
If I could just add to what Jacqueline's just said on the Paris alignment. This was clearly the first time we've done this assessment, and it's a shot in time as to where we are now. It's also driven largely by what the clients own, because essentially we don't, the decision as to which funds that you own is done by the 31 different funds. So just wanted to highlight that the influence of what our clients decide to invest in is actually very important in this. Obviously, the one of the things that we're trying to do, which Jacqueline's mentioned earlier, and we'll talk more about later, is the fact that we're launching funds which are more Paris aligned. In fact, I would argue some of them are actually positive to climate going forward, and we'll be coming on to that because that's the renewables fund that we'll be talking about later. So as I largely say with this, this is a point in time. We've got some really good information. The next step is obviously engaging and working with clients to improve that footprint or climate footprint over time and make it Paris aligned, which is something we're very driven to do.
Yeah, Councillor Michael Desmond wants to start the question.
Yeah, so I'm Michael Desmond, Vice Chair of the committee. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all virtually. We work closely with Divest Hackney, and we have a remarkable success over the last 3 to 4 years achieving our target. And we were, at the cutting edge, and we're very proud of that. The CIV is, making progress, which we're very pleased to see. One of the arguments some people say is that it's useful maintaining investments in some companies which have a fossil fuel involvement because we can influence them. Divest Hackney is not of that opinion. Could I ask you if you've had any influence in any of the companies that you invest on in our behalf, or whether you see any benefit from these investments in terms of changing their policies to make them divest from fossil fuels themselves?
Jacqueline, yeah.
Yes, sure. So I'm not entirely sure if I'm referring specifically to your holdings, but I do have a couple of examples that might be interesting, I hope. So you might remember that LAP have been quite involved recently in engagement regarding the situation with Rio Tinto and the destruction of the culturally significant sites in Western Australia. This is quite a good example of an engagement that we've been following through on. So whilst one of our fund managers made the decision to take a 1% holding in Rio Tinto, it was specifically due to the fact that there's been a huge amount of work done on climate change. The company themselves had made several sales, as it were, rather than divestment, sorry. So they'd actually sold all of their thermal coal assets, and they now have no exposure to fossil fuels. This was more of a net positive investment / engagement opportunity, because the company themselves had very strict carbon zero targets for 2050 with really clear milestones. I think they had something like a 30% reduction milestone for 2030 and a 15% reduction in absolute emissions. This is quite a nice example, because it sort of, the engagement almost came about because of poor governance practices. And we were able to actually work with Baillie Gifford quite closely to understand where we can sort of support them in making recommendations and improvements on that, whilst understanding some of the advantages that the company itself had to sort of a climate perspective. But equally, there are other situations where we've, engaged, or where our fund managers, have engaged on our behalf, given the way that we're currently set up at the moment. Such as, for example, with ExxonMobil. I know that one of our fund managers, I think it's Ruffer, who have them in their holdings, had been doing a lot of work on climate action with ExxonMobil, for example, and they've supported various shareholder resolutions on setting better or more ambitious climate targets. But actually, in this particular instance, the company showed a huge amount of inflexibility in relation to those shareholder engagements on the topic of climate change. And so as a result, in this instance, they did actually sell down the equity quite considerably. So there's areas where we're seeing engagement making progress, where we're seeing targets being set and really, really firm transition plans being made, and where we're sort of, clearly getting good responses in terms of that engagement and improvement to governance practices, where we're being listened to. And we have other examples where that voice is not being heard. And so I think when it comes to the engagement versus divestment debate, it's very much about companies which are demonstrating that they're in the right trajectory, that they're demonstrating the right momentum, and that we are able to engage with them. Where companies are not able to demonstrate progress and are not engaging correctly, then that definitely is an area where we have to take things further, or would encourage our managers to in that instance.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're going to have to move on now, but if I could just say thank you. I presume Jason's staying for the next bit as well, but so thank you very much, Jacqueline, and thanks for the presentation. And obviously, we're all on the beginning of a journey here, and as we get more and more invested in the CIV, it'll be interesting
See you all.
Great. So, Michael.
Okay. So
You're muted as well, Michael.
oh, I'm doing it as well. Sorry. I just introduced myself. I think everyone knows who I am anyway now that's on the call. So this report is really to introduce a timetable for the review of responsible investment for the Pensions Committee and the fund. I think it's obviously quite important to recognise the work that's taken place to date in terms of, certainly in terms of carbon, and obviously the target that we set. And we go on to talk about that a little bit later. But also the work that we've done in terms of engagement. Most of our engagement has, well, I say most, I think all of our engagement has been through LAP, because we feel that's where we have most influence because of all the different members being combined and having that combined assets under management, etc. But this report really is looking at taking forward the responsible investment. Obviously, there's been lots of, we get emails around divesting in terms of fossil fuels, etc. There's obviously the pressure groups around human rights in various areas, etc. And it's important that we start looking, well, not start looking, but we actually update and make sure we are, if like on the forefront of making sure our policies in this area are actually at the forefront of the LGPS, really. I think that's where we've wanted to be and aspire to be to date. So in terms of what we want to look at going forward, and the idea is that over the next couple of committees, and certainly by the end of the year, we will have looked at reviewing the fund manager. And I think from the talk we just had from the CIV, it's quite important, obviously quite important, that we, sorry, baby just burst in the room. Sorry about that.
That's all right. It's great. She or he is very welcome.
Put me off where I was now. Yeah, sorry, link. So I think it's very
staying at the forefront, you said. I think that's
yeah, indeed, and I think linking into that, obviously the talk we've just had from the CIV around their approach to responsible investment, and some of the decisions that the committee have already taken in terms of the new investment strategy, and obviously moving quite a few of our funds, particularly the equity front, away from the UK into more global, low carbon and sustainable indices, and within the CIV. So I think it's going to be important, obviously, we work alongside those managers and the CIV to make sure their policies actually, we can have an influence on those too. So the timetable that we're setting out in this report is really in terms of, firstly, and I think we've really started that tonight, really, by getting a quick update from the CIV on their approach to responsible investment. But we need to start looking at things like their beliefs, and we've already spoken about the climate policy, but their stewardship policy and voting guidelines, and indeed the reporting that I think they spoke about anyway. I think it's going to be important for us to actually look at not only the CIV, but some of the fund managers that we're actually invested in through the CIV. So BlackRock's going to be a major player in that because of the funds that we're either already in or looking to go into over the next 18 months or so. Alongside that, we need to be looking at the stewardship code and our approach to that, and certainly understanding what's required. So if and when we sign up to it, we can actually make sure we are able to actually measure our performance against that and the reporting requirements that come out of that. Likewise, the TCFDs, the Task Force for Climate Financial Disclosures. Again, we need to fully understand what these are about before we act. So we're not just signing a piece of paper, we're actually making sure we've got the processes in place to actually follow through on those policies, etc. And then I think we need to, I mean, it wasn't long ago that we obviously agreed a set of investment beliefs, and they are they've all been entrenched in the investment strategy, and we've always said that they start coming through in the management selection process. So part of the due diligence for manager selection through the CIV, etc., is ensuring that our ESG policies and our beliefs are actually come through in those. So I think we obviously need to make sure those investment beliefs remain up to date and move along with different issues that actually come up. So I think the idea is over the next two to three committees, and I certainly think we're going to need some workshops to actually put some of the more detailed work into these, is to look at the major areas and actually redefine our ESG policies and actually start addressing some of the issues that we're often talking about. I think alongside that, we obviously need to look at where we are on our climate change target. I think last year, obviously, we looked at where we were at half point stage, and we recognised that we was already 60% of the way to achieving the target that we actually set, which is obviously very good in terms of the progress made to that point. I think in light of some of the recent decisions that we've made in terms of the investment strategy, it's quite clear that the fund is going to be a greener fund with a greener portfolio, because I say a lot of our exposure to fossil fuels is through UK indices, etc. We're moving out of that. We are going to move. We've already agreed that we'd move into the more sustainable and low carbon strategies. So yeah, I think what we need to then do is obviously look at where that target goes beyond that. So we're looking to achieve that target by the end of, well, around about the end of this year. I think the 6 years actually runs out in March, but next year. But we'll re-engage true costs towards the end of this year to actually measure where we are on that target we set. And I would expect us there to have, well, certainly have achieved it and hopefully exceeded it, given some of the changes already made. And then to start looking at where we go in terms of the target going forward. So alignment, for example, or the ambition to align with the net zero carbon footprint of the council's overall policy by 2040. Consideration of that and what impact that will have on the assets that we own, etc. And to bring through certainly a refreshed target on carbon, not only in line with Paris, but I think hopefully in line with the 1.5 degree going forward is where we would certainly like to get to. So I think that gives an overview. The actual appendices sets out a timetable over the next couple of committees. To be honest, I think we've already started in terms of looking at the CIVS approach, but we obviously need to bring a lot more detailed papers back on where we are in these various areas, which will set out where we currently are, where we need to be, and how we're going to get there, and then agree those policies through that.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, so that's, yeah.
I didn't mean to. Had you finished there? Sorry.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any questions or comments on that? Polly Billington, Councillor Billington, and then Henry.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm really pleased to see the timetable. It looks clear and straightforward. I'm a bit confused, having heard from Civ earlier, where it feels a little bit like, oh, after you, Claude, because no one's going to move, because there's here we're saying we're reviewing LCIF's approach to responsible investment and engagement, and they are saying there's a limit to what they can do because it depends on their clients' investment as to whether they can reach the target. Now, somebody's got to move on this, and I know the challenge with the CIV is that we've got 32 boroughs, not all of which are as ambitious as and responsible, I would argue, as Hackney in terms of shifting our investment profile the right way. But when we review that, if we can't do much, who really has control over that LCIV investment, and what the limits does that put on our ability to be able to achieve our responsible investment targets is my primary question. And then secondly, I'm particularly keen to see that we've got training on stewardship and TCFD. Who is that going to be conducted by? Because I think we need to make sure that everybody is really fully aware and understand that process and what the implications are. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Polly. Can we take Henry and then Ben, and then perhaps if Michael can come all at once, and if he misses anything, you're all welcome to come back.
Yep.
Henry.
Thank you, Robert. Just slightly building on Polly's point, which I think is a really important one. I mean, not for now, but when we come to look at our targets down the line, I would really like to actually look at this target of 2040. I think we should try and pull that in. But I'm very, very conscious of exactly that point. What is it that Hackney can do on its own? But I do think that I sit on one other investment committee, and we're also looking at the same sort of thing. But I think we should be really ambitious here. But I'd quite like an answer to her question as to what can we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. And Ben.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, it's sort of along the same lines. It's really, I suppose, just looking forward when we're drawing up this timetable for probably greater degree of specificity. So if we just take fossil fuels, what is the total fossil fuel amount in different funds? Were those funds coming up for renewal where we might be able to have a say or move it somewhere else? So we're looking at sort of a grid-like approach, so we have some idea about where things are, different funds, different timetables, and I think that would certainly help me conceptualize what the different challenges are by breaking them down in that way.
Okay, Michael, do you want to come back on all those? And maybe, I don't know if Andrew wants to add something after that.
Yeah,
Michael?
Yep. So in terms of LSIV and who controls, I think the important thing, they mentioned some of the seed investment groups, and I think the important thing about those is that we've been able to influence, so the boroughs have been involved in putting some of the mandates together and tried to influence and have influenced where they've got to in terms of what they're asking the fund managers in putting together the mandates. Clearly, as you say, there's always going to be some, because the CIV has to try and look after 32 boroughs, there's some compromise, but I think that is helped by the fact that they've got a number of mandates which people can choose to go into. So like we've taken decisions to go into the low carbon sustainable mandates, whereas some other boroughs might have chosen to go into some of that where that's not suitable for them, would have gone into some of the mandates that aren't tilted in that way. So I think there's the influence through the bringing together of the new mandates that they're working on, and those seed investor groups are quite important. Training and stewardship, I actually need to talk to, so I'm not sure who's going to be delivering that yet, and maybe Andrew can help me on that one. But I'll come back to it in a minute. I'd say, I mean, we set out this timetable. I need to work on actually pulling this out and actually achieving it over the next committee now. Henry, so I can't read my own writing now.
I can, Michael, if it's helpful, I can chip in on just those points at this stage, and then
okay, comment.
Sorry, Polly, did you want to come straight back now or wait till they're finished? Polly's got a hand up again.
Yeah, I'll wait till the finish if that's all right.
Okay.
Sorry, Andrew.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Chair. So I was going to say on those 2 points, I think the strategy decision which you make, i.e. we invest in equities, and then recently we've made the decision to move from, for example, UK equities into the Baillie Gifford Paris Aligned Fund. Those are the decisions that I guess are the committee's doing. So I guess whenever LSIV report on their alignment with Paris, it will be very different if you actually look at the subset for the fund. So I think what's really encouraging for me is, as Michael said, I completely agree, their commitment to this, and I guess Jacqueline's sort of role and remit, and the ability, as Michael said, to work with them in terms of development of future funds which are available, which will align with what the fund's aspirations may be. So they have done lots of work on that area in recent times, and I think they will continue to be engaged on that more. I think by looking at the broad range of policies that they're working on, as Ben alluded to, and will sort of work on over the next few months, it also gives the opportunity for the fund to feed into how they develop their voting and engagement policies, much like has taken place in the development of seed investment groups for other funds. So actually to sort of get more on their table based on what the desires and aspirations are with regard to either new sub-funds or in terms of voting and engagement and representation of SDG goals and so on and so forth, so that they can feed those into the policies that they set out as we kind of move forward. So I think that's maybe the first couple. On training, we can facilitate that via Simon, who's come along to committees previously. He's our head of investment responsibilities equally. We can certainly feed into that. That would be great.
Okay, thank you.
Polly, sorry. Michael, were you, sorry,
Yeah,
did you say something?
There was a
Michael,
couple.
sorry.
Yeah, there are a couple of other questions. So, Councillor Hayhurst asked about a grid showing where we are now. I think it was about where we are now in terms of funds and where we're moving to, so that you can see that set out in terms of. I think that was your question. Which
Yeah,
we
so say for example, we've got 35 million in fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Which funds are they in? When can we get out of them?
Okay, so level of detail. Okay, so I mean, what we have set out in the previous paper for investment strategy at last committee was the mandate we're currently invested in, and where we're expecting to go to in terms of decisions you've made. And I think we can certainly do some work around stock lists for those to identify where we're moving away and where we're moving to. And Henry, I don't think I've answered your question, but I can't read what I've written, I'm afraid. Sorry.
It wasn't really a question, Michael. It was just a hope that when we do look at targets down the line, that we look quite hard at that figure, that date of 2040, because I think it should be pulled. There's so much momentum now in the investment world on having an impact on climate change. I think we can make a difference and pull that 2040 date backwards by 5 or perhaps even more years.
Okay.
Right. So, Polly, sorry about that.
That's all right.
A lot of people wanted to talk at once.
Okay, Henry, that 2040 target is not just for the pension fund, actually, that's for the whole council. So I think we'll be able to divest the pension fund much earlier than that in terms of cleaning ourselves from the risks of investment in fossil fuels, apart from the risks around the CIV, which I think still stand from the answer that I had for my question. And I suppose my second follow-up, it sort of makes it slightly more challenging, because I'm really aware that our responsible investment strategy has not just looked at climate, but has also looked at other things, including making sure that we are investing in jobs that will replace the dirty fossil fuels jobs. And I'm wondering what kind of strategies do our investors and fund managers have, and indeed what are the metrics for them to identify effectively that we are investing in funds that will create jobs for the people who will otherwise be losing them. I say this advisedly because I'm particularly anxious about the rhetoric around divestment, which seems to bear absolutely no consideration for anybody whose jobs is on the line, as it currently is, when they are dependent, when they're in fossil fuel dependent jobs. And that's as part of our responsible investment strategy. I know adds a further complication for our investors, but I'm interested to know how we're going to be navigating that. I don't expect an answer straight away, but I just wanted to flag it, because if we're getting as far as we are, and the barrier seems to be, Jonathan's absolutely right about regulatory risk. The CIV are basically, it is a very, very difficult structure for us to work in. And the other thing is, we don't just want to be investing in things that don't create jobs where people need them, particularly in energy intensive industries and those geographies.
Okay, I think that, yeah. Does anyone, do the officers or advisors want to come back on any of that?
I mean, I obviously I totally agree with what Councillor Billings said, and I think it's something we do need, obviously, as you say, we need to consider that in going forward in looking at our ESG policies and that side of it, because it is something that, we haven't addressed today, and I don't think, and I haven't seen anyone addressing that today, but it's certainly something we need to be looking at.
And the only thing I would add is that I think that is consistent with the broadening of the area or the terminology around this consideration, which is responsible investment, and relates to the meeting we had circa a year ago now in relation to SDG goals and aspirations. So I would just say I completely agree, and that's we'll look to sort of factor that in.
Okay, right. Can I just clarify in just as we finish off this item? We're currently saying that I just see on 7.6 here that we now think that the investment strategy we've just approved will bring the funds into line with the 1.5 degrees scenario.
Yeah, we're anticipating as it moves towards it and into line with it. I think we need to do that piece of work, obviously, around and it's linked to what Councillor Hayhurst just mentioned about what stocks we're investing in and what we will be going forward into those new investment mandates.
So, sorry, it's on a yes and no scale. That's a sort of think so. Well, subject to research, yeah.
We're expecting it to bring us into line with it. Yeah.
Okay, well that's good, because it was these things are running in parallel, really. Both our stock selection, our fund manager selection, our asset allocation, and our views on responsible investment. Okay, I think obviously this is just dipping our toe into the water on this issue, but I think you can see here the ambition here is to sort of basically to try and up our game on this in the way that you set out in the report, and both Polly and Ben have mentioned in the particular areas that, and Henry there, and all of the areas that we've raised. So I think that's there. I mean, there's a couple of things that I'd like to see as we go forward, but just like every other member of the committee, I think as we sort of develop this agenda, we just feed things in that we'd like to see, we can add them. If you contact the officers, we can add them to the training sessions and pick them up at our meeting next time, which I'm guessing will either be more or less dedicated to this, or we'll probably need a decent sort of workshop session on it as well.
I think it's likely we're going to need a workshop session to deal with it properly.
The only thing I've had discussions with you about voting and engagement. Obviously, we're relying very heavily on LAP at the moment, which is fair enough because it's an excellent organisation, but obviously it can only cover a quite high level way of looking at this thing, and we perhaps need to think about how we might develop that area as we move into the CIV, particularly as the CIV's obviously planning to have a whole range of services there, which you may or may not be able to go on the back of, actually, even though we're not in the CIV, depending on how Jacqueline works it all out. Sorry. So that's one area. And also I'd like to see how we may or may not cooperate with other organisations. We're in LAF, but personally, I'd like to see us be able to sign up to the UN Principles on Responsible Investment and maybe join the IAGC.
Here.
And organisations such as that. Sorry, I had written down on the paper what they are. I have to look at every time, isn't it? It's the International Investor Group on Climate Change. So, which I think is something you should. Signing up to those things will require us to do things. They're not just tick boxes. So we can sort of think about all of that going forward. Okay, has anyone last comments or questions on any of this? I'd say we overrun a bit, but that was inevitable. We'll catch up later, I hope. Okay, well, thank you very much for Andrew and Michael. That's great, and we look forward to working on this in the future. That's excellent. Shall we have a 5-minute break now? Yeah, and then so that's 10 to 8, and then we'll move on with the rest of the agenda at pace. So see you again at 10 to 8. Ben. Okay, so if we can start again, I will. I think first of all, I've got to go back to the last report, haven't I? And notes the ask you to note the recommendations as set out into one is to note the timetable for review of responsible investment activities and note the timetable for the work on climate change policy as set out in the recommendations. Can we note those 2 points?
Noted.
Thank you very much. So the next item is the risk register. We're going to have a training update and then consider the actual items in the register itself. I think Michael's leading on this and Karen William is going to do some training, and we have 25 minutes for this, yeah?
Yeah. So I'm going to hand over to Karen at this stage because I think it's probably worth picking up the training because that's linked into the register as well itself. So we've tried to make it relative to the fund's actual risk register itself. So I'll hand straight over to Karen at this point.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Chair.
Welcome, Karen.
Thank you. So Karen McWilliam from Aon, and we are the governance and benefits advisors to the fund. I'll share my presentation. I am conscious we are overrunning, so I'm happy to try and whiz through the training aspect of this. And but equally, if I am going too fast, please do stop me. Oh, everything is always a little bit different in all these different systems.
I have that trouble.
Yeah.
I've been on 3 different ones today.
Yeah, I know. So can I just check? Can you see? No.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Excellent, that's good. And hopefully they're big enough as well. I was struggling with the size of the last set of slides, so hopefully it's okay. So what I'm going to do is not just talk about the Hackney risk register, but give you a little bit of background about risk management within the LGPS context. First of all, just highlight that there is actually a CIPFA LGPS risk management guide, and also Hackney Pension Fund have their own risk management policy as well. So I just want to pull out a couple of elements from that, and then not necessarily go through what is a risk register, but I just want to highlight a couple of bits about the layout of your risk register that might be slightly different to some other risk registers that you see. Okay. We have a few quotes here. In the interest of time, I'll just get on with them. This quotation actually comes from the Society of Local Authority Chief Executives guidance on managing risk and controlling risk in a local authority environment. So it's quite an obvious quotation. And then if we focus now on the CIPFA guidance, so CIPFA is obviously one of the professional organisations that as a finance team you very much have regard to their guidance. A lot of the information within the LGPS risk management guidance is quite straightforward. For example, this risk management cycle, I'm sure that you're all familiar with the focus of identification, analysis, control and then monitoring. However, what is particularly helpful within the CIPFA risk management guidance is they do actually take us through what we would expect to be some quite typical risks in the area of managing an LGPS fund. Now, most of them will be quite straightforward to us, thinking about the assets and the liabilities. Maybe not quite so typical for a pension fund where the council has predominantly all the membership in the fund as the employer risk, but actually we do always need to think about the covenant of employers in the fund and whether there's any risk there. We also have to think about resource and skill. Not only are the officers running the fund, but also of you as the pension committee and also the pension board supporting and all the advisors as well. And then on the top right here, thinking about administration and communication type risks. And this isn't just in relation to, how we look after or administer the scheme benefits. This is very much sort of operational risk as well. And also how we communicate with our stakeholders in relation to the fund. Reputational risk. I'm sure everyone on the call now knows the name Jackie Weaver. We always hope that would never happen to a situation when it comes to managing managing our pension fund. And obviously regulatory and compliance risk. We see so much bad press nowadays from things like some of the pension funds not meeting their annual benefit statement statutory deadlines, so we have to be mindful of that. So the guidance is actually quite useful if we want to sort of check against, you know, what sort of risks are we thinking about in relation to the pension fund. It then does highlight that as a pension fund, we should have a risk management strategy, we should have a risk management policy, and that should very much lead into the processes about how we're managing risk within the fund. And obviously a key part of that is, apologies if you see messages popping up there, a key part of that is the risk register that we maintain on behalf of the fund, and which is shared with you at each meeting. Theodore Roosevelt said, risk is like fire. If we can control it, it will help us, and if it's uncontrolled, it will destroy us. There's another nice quote, we thought. So then turning more specifically to the Hackney Pension Fund risk policy, this was originally agreed back in June 2015, so I appreciate it's not a policy that comes back to committee that regularly. We tend to look at it every 3 years or so, but to tell you the truth, it does what we need it to do, so it's very rare that we actually do need to update the policy. But just some key points from the policy, and that is the fact that when we come to managing a pension fund, it's not possible or even desirable to eliminate all risks. We have to recognise that actually risk can be our friend when it comes to managing a pension fund. So if you have a read of the policy, you'll definitely see that theme coming through. The policy also highlights how we assess risk, the various areas that help us identify what goes into the risk register, such as some of the ways that we measure against our objectives, and that might highlight an area of a risk for us. Our audit reports can be extremely useful, and just even discussions at the pension board can help us think about other areas of risk. And then obviously we have a process in managing that risk, which includes the fact that the risk register is shared with you at each meeting as well. Good old Yoda from Star Wars said this, and the key point about this is it's really important that we do identify our risks and get them into the risk register, because it gives us a bit of focus so that we can actually do something about them. In relation to the risk register itself, and it's probably one of the key benefits of working remotely, is that we can actually look at documents electronically and actually blow them up so that they're big enough to be able to read, because we recognise there's a lot of detail in the risk register. But I just want to highlight the heat map within the risk register that you look at. The risk register for the pension fund has got two different risk measurements within it. Now that is quite typical in most risk registers nowadays, but often those two measures, one is before internal controls and one is after internal controls, the residual risk. In the pension fund environment, we're doing it slightly different. The first one is, this is the current risk rating, and the second one is, this is what we think we would like that risk to be set at, the target risk rating. And then if you look at the heat map, the numbers relate to each of the numbers in the risk register. And if we look at number 6 of the governance risk, it's currently sitting on red because it's got major impact and likely to happen. The yellow background to the box actually tells us that the target is yellow. So by looking at the heat map, you can see straight away whether or not the risk you're looking at is actually on target. And the little arrows just highlight where has the risk moved from since the last time you looked at the risk register. So your last key point that we looked at the risk register. So you will actually be able to tell which risks have transferred. So I hope that's quite useful. The other aspect of it is it does actually include a little smiley face, and next to the smiley face it will tell you specifically the number that we're away from the target likelihood or impact rating that we're trying to get to. So hopefully both of them are just allow it to be a little bit easier to view. So that's really all I was going to say as part of the training. I did say that I was going to run through it. We did do a major review of the risk register last year. All the officers of the fund were involved. and also all the, I really hope I've not frozen because you've all gone extremely still. No, you're okay. Thank you for moving, Michael. All the officers and also all the advisors, we ran a couple of workshops last year where we went through the risk register, really, starting from scratch, and we made a number of changes. So just for ease, we've listed what these key changes are. There was one or two new risks being added in. Needless to say, things like external challenge. We've seen McLeod come upon us and quite a lot of regulatory change. We're expecting asset pooling guidance to be coming out probably sometime this year. And those are things that is very difficult to control. But other than that, it was generally changing the scoring of risks and really thinking fundamentally about what the internal controls are and what action needs to be taken. So, Chair, I'm really happy to answer any questions. Equally, if you want to focus on some of the higher rated risks, I have got them in the appendix slide, all the red risks, so I'm happy to go through some of them, but really it's over to you in the interest of time, how you want to play it.
Okay, does anyone want to ask any questions at this stage, or shall we move on to the next bit? Cam?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just... thank you, Karen, for the presentation. I'm just wondering if you can give us an example of gross risk, because you mentioned about this residual risk. So if you give an example of gross risk, and again, my question, you mentioned McLeod problems. So do you think 2022 is a realistic implementation date for the full McLeod remedy?
Okay, shall we take Henry as well, and then Karen can come back on both. Henry.
Thank you. Just on exactly the same point on McLeod, it just slightly worries me that we're sitting there with a risk we've quantified as major and is almost certain, and we're looking at a review date 6 months down the line. So, I mean, in my line of business, we would be doing something about something like that already, but have we actually quantified it? And just following up what Kaz's point is, what is the timeline for a resolution in terms of whether we've got to make a provision or have the scheme actuaries been advised or what?
Okay, Karen.
Okay, thank you. Both very good questions. So first of all, just to explain, Cam, the point about how we deal with current and target risks. So McLeod is probably quite a good example. All this is the full line of the risk register relating to the McLeod risk. So the first aspect you will see is the current risk. So that is after all the controls that we currently have in place. And then later on in the risk register, in the same line, further to the right, you'll see the target risk. And that's where we think we want to get to. And once we feel things are in control, we should be able to get to that point. Does that answer your question on that point?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. McLeod is a wonderful one. We are so reliant on MHCLG and also the Scheme Advisory Board and the Local Government Association to help us with McLeod and provide us with timelines and guidance. First of all, in relation to how we measure impact and likelihood, there is actually a key behind the risk register, and maybe in the future we should actually copy that key for you, where we look at there is actually a definition for both likelihood and impact, and it gives examples. So impact might talk about it affects X number of the scheme membership, or we expect reputational damage. So it gives some definitions, and that's where we actually choose whether something falls within major or minor or somewhere in between. And the likelihood, again, it's the percentage chance of that actually happening. So at this point in time, we are very much aware that the work associated with McLeod could well impact either business as usual, or it may be difficult to deliver. And the reason that we're feeling that is the case, and Michael might want to add in some more on the back of this since he is involved with some of the working groups. The reason why we feel that is the case, it's not necessarily around the financial implications on the pension fund and the employers, but more about the magnitude of the work that has to be done to get all the information in relation to the scheme members from the employers into the Equinity system, and then recalculate the benefits to then decide whether or not those scheme members are going to be affected. And just to make it even more stressful and, I don't know, just really frustrating, we know that actually very few of the scheme members are going to be impacted, but we have to go through the process of actually checking to see whether that is the case in order to determine whether or not and which ones are impacted. So at the moment it's very difficult because we don't know the true timelines we're going to be working to. We're waiting for guidance from the Scheme Advisory Board and the Local Government Association in relation to maybe tolerances or assumptions we can make if information isn't available. And probably we are in this current red situation because of the impact of the cyber attack. Hackney Council is obviously one of the key employers for the fund, has the highest proportion of the membership, and we are having to work with the payroll team in order to go back particularly to the old payroll system, because we have to get data all the way back to 2014. And that's under the old payroll system. And so because of the cyber attack, access to that data is more difficult. They are working hard because they do think that hopefully they should be able to get the data, but we're trying to get it as effectively and efficiently as possible. So hence the reason we are a risk red at the moment, but actually it's those operational issues that are pushing the risk rating at the moment rather than any concern about the financial implications. And I probably, if you don't mind, just want to check with Michael whether he wants to add in anything on that, because he's been very much involved.
Yeah,
Okay, Michael.
I can certainly add to that on the financial implications. The actuary have done some work for us on that, and in the triennial valuation last year, they actually had to put an estimate in for McLeod, and they're confident. Well, they're more than confident. They've confirmed that estimate more than covers the McLeod risk, the financial risk to the fund. And they've also done that employer level, and we're just about to go out to employers. I think we had an employer forum last week where it was discussed generally, but we're just about to send communications out to individual employers, setting out whether they're impacted or not. Off the top of my head, 14 employers weren't impacted at all because they've got no employers that fall within the criteria, and the others are affected. Their balance sheet will be affected at between 0.2 and 1%. So we're just about to clear all those comms and get out to employers on those. But yeah, as Karen says, the main risk at the moment is the data from the council, but availability of that between 2014 and 17 when we moved over to the new payroll system. But we're working on recovery of that through various. We've got a couple of options. Yeah.
Okay, Karen.
Okay, I just open for any other questions or any, whether it's McLeod or any of the other risks that are on the risk register.
There's no one showing at the moment, Karen.
Okay. Okay, in that case, I think I've got nothing further to add for that item, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Karen. That's really helpful.
Okay.
Mike, anything? Well, you're going to take us through the next bit, or is?
But I think the presentation goes on, so the appendix just picks out the main risks or the main high risks that are there. So we've already talked about the McLeod one. I think ideally we've also got risk around poor membership data. We've had issues in the past with data going across to the pension system at year end in particular, which affect our ability to actually hit deadlines with annual benefit statements. A lot of work has gone on in that area over the last year or so, particularly in building an interface, which I'm pleased to say we've finally got a file that was now being tested. So running out of the payroll system and into the pension system at testing stage. So we're hopeful that will solve a lot of the problems around annual benefit statements and ongoing membership data within the fund. I think obviously another risk we've always got is external regulatory changes. The most recent one obviously was, I think last committee we gave you training on 95k cap. We said about all the problems that we've got going forward, and lo and behold, last month the government revoked that 95k cap. I'm in no doubt they'll come back with a new one in some shape or form, but hopefully more thought through in terms of the regulations that will sit behind it and the impact that they're hoping to have. So that's an example of one of the other high risks that we've got around, external regulations, etc. I think those are the main high risks that we've got, that we've highlighted there. What I would like to take from this session, if members can look at the more detailed register we've got and come back outside the meeting with any comments, etc., so we can actually factor those into future reviews.
Okay, I think that's it's quite complicated. It's quite complicated to work yourself around all the documents. So if you could take that as people are very welcome to come back with comments, or and on the structure of the risk. Have we actually formally adopted it as members? Because I know there's a big revision of it as an officer exercise essentially, but it's our risk register, isn't it?
Yes, it is. No, and that's why I'm saying.
So
if we can have that feedback, that would be brilliant.
Okay. So has anyone got any immediate questions?
Cam wants to come back up.
Sorry.
Councillor Adams has another question.
Yes, Cam.
It's not a question. It's just I'm just curious. How does the current pandemic affect the risk register? If it affects at all, I don't know, but maybe something you can talk to us about.
Yeah, obviously we've looked at the risks around COVID, and we're very early on. We put measures in terms of making sure that we could ensure that members' benefits are paid on time, new members coming into pensions payment are actually dealt with, and things like death grants, etc., being able to deal with those. So it was really making sure that the admin was up to scratch in terms of both parties, actually, both our third-party administrators, and I think from the quarterly updates that we've shown in the past, it was quite clear that they were badly affected in the very first lockdown, whereas the council's pensions team, in-house team, weren't so badly affected. I think largely because the systems we've been very much used to working from home as ongoing anyway. But I am pleased to say that certainly, as you see in the quarterly update report, the third-party administration's BAU side has certainly picked up and learnt some of the lessons that they struggled with early on. Okay.
I'm mute now. Sorry. Okay, everyone. So we were asked here to consider the risk register and to feedback separately to officers any matters we think need to be taken into consideration in future iterations on the quarterly update report. So if members will do that, and we'll note that, and unless there are nothing else, let's see it. We'll move on then. Thank you very much. So the next item is the business plan. So
Yes.
Michael Haliset's going to introduce this.
Yeah, so this basically, we looked at the business plan last year quite late on because it was because of the impact of COVID and one of the meetings being cancelled. So it might seem this has come back quite quickly, but we're actually just bringing it back onto the normal timetable to get business plan agreed at the ahead of the financial year and the 3 years ahead, and to approve the budget for the upcoming year. So I think the important thing about the business plan is we do have to recognise it is a living document. Obviously things change, certainly around things that we need to bring to committee. The timing of those might change, and the way we use some of the additional workshops to deal with some of that. So that is one thing I would certainly say in terms of The business plan sets out our aspirations. It certainly sets out all the things we need to do over the next 3 years. And it sets out a timetable for them, but it's subject to change and things that we need to do going forward. But it is important that we have that business plan, obviously, so we can make sure we're on top of items and they're always in our focus in terms of what needs to be done. I think in the business plan in particular this time round, we've also put, I think, given some of the discussions we've had at previous meetings about procurements, which might have come late, etc., there is a section in the business plan itself which actually pulls those procurements out going forward. So we know we've got the tender for advisors, all our advisors due over, well, certainly by the end of this financial year. Sorry, next financial year. I'm a little bit ahead of myself. And we've also got one which we're actually looking at tonight, later on, the custodian contract extension and considerations around banking, etc., which would tie in with council's banking procedures. But it's important that the pension fund make sure its banking procedures are up to date as well. I wasn't intending to go into any detail into the business plan.
I think that's okay. I mean, it's a full and comprehensive report. I'm sure members have got that picture, read it.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, the thing I would point out is I think there's particularly there's the future agendas for committees, which are definitely subject to change, and particularly given some of the conversations we've had tonight, we will juggle some of those around to make sure we can deal with, you know, the stewardship and things like that within the timeframes that we've set out.
Okay, has anyone got any questions or comments on this? And remember, we've got our budget in it, which I will note. Yeah, he's on pay. So it depends on what particular sort of document you're looking at, as where you find it. But the budget remains cash flow positive, is what I was going to say. It's good to say.
Chair, I'm just trying to read the budget. What are we talking about here? We're talking 100,000, millions.
Sorry, that was that was saying I was meant to send it's millions. Yes.
Apologies.
My only.
So Ben, yeah, carry on.
Sorry,
just a very brief observation. Just looking at obviously the overall budget on how much we use for management expenses, administration costs, and stuff. I going back to the earlier discussion in terms of the priority about responsible investment. I just query whether it's worth giving some thought in the future to having a dedicated responsible investment officer or something like that. Just give it in the overall scheme of things. I float that.
That's an interesting point. Does anyone want to comment on that? Yeah, officer.
Well, I think it's something we can consider as we're considering the policies and how we take those forward.
Well, we've said at the previous committee that should there be a need for a resource on this area or additional investment advice, or indeed support generally, you know, because we're under the cosh a bit on generally, aren't we? Particularly with everything that's gone on with COVID and the cyber attack. The committee remains open to suggestions of providing more resources. Obviously, cost is an issue for us and will always be an issue, but we're not constraining quite the same way the council's general fund is.
Yeah.
So yeah, something maybe we can consider support in that area as we go forward with the work we're doing on responsible investment. Yeah.
Yeah. No, indeed.
One thing I wanted to point out in this report is about the issue about committee membership and membership of the board. In relation to this committee, the co-optees and the board, I mean the entire membership of the board really. Just to highlight that we are looking here to sort of regularise that and basically sort out timescales and issues like that, aren't we, in here? So there's a report coming to us at some point soon, which will say how long people are appointed for, what the process is for replacing and all that sort of thing. That's my understanding. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so Henry's got his hand up, and then Michael Desmond. Henry.
Two questions. One was just, I may be missing it. I'm just surprised that we haven't got or haven't set ourselves a target to narrow the gap. I know we're now at 92% funding, which is pretty good, but the fact is it's not 100%. I mean, shouldn't that be something that we should be setting ourselves, given our fiduciary responsibilities? That was my one question. My second question was really a response to that last point. I don't think that, as personally, that we should have an officer in charge of responsible investment, because it's becoming so mainstream that I believe that climate change investment and sustainable investment is so part and parcel now of where we should be going that I don't think it warrants a separate officer. It should be part of the ingrained culture, but that's just my view.
Okay, well, as I said, we can pick that point up in the discussion we're going to have going forward. So Michael and then Polly. Michael Desmond, sorry.
Shall I respond on the funding?
Well, do you want to do that? I was going to save them all up to save time, but go on then. Michael, respond now. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, obviously the funding gap is considered in the triennial valuation. So as part of the contributions that have been set over the next 3 years, that funding that's got a horizon to close the gap over the next 17 to 20 years. And that's part of the consideration of the triennial valuation. That's the very reason we have that every 3 years. So
okay, thank you.
Yeah, so it's not part of the business plan, but it's something obviously considered as by the committee.
Chair, you got Jonathan. Jonathan is raising his hand.
It's my turn to be on mute. So Councillor Desmond and Councillor Billington.
And Jonathan is got his hands up.
Sorry, who? I can only see I can only see hands. Who was that? Has got their hands up besides Michael Desmond and Polly Billington?
Jonathan
as well, is he?
Yeah.
I can't. All right. Okay. I can't see that on my scene. I can't see Jonathan or his hand, but I'll take Jonathan next. So Michael Desmond, Polly Billington, then Jonathan. Michael. Can anyone hear Michael?
No, he's muted.
Michael, we think you're muted.
And he's taken his picture off. Michael, take your...
Yeah, shall we move on to Polly then? Polly.
I was just going to say, I sympathise with Henry's point about responsible investment being very mainstream, but it is still quite a specialised area in terms of knowledge and expertise. So I would be... I'm very happy to take or to hear advice or recommendations from the team about what is the best way of effectively mainstreaming our responsible investment knowledge, bearing in mind it is currently still something which is quite niche within the overall industry. I know from talking to financiers during the day, however willing they are, there is a specific amount of knowledge, and we shouldn't assume that just because we think it's becoming mainstream that it is mainstream within the industry, and there's a steep learning curve for fund managers and everybody else, and so I just think we need to be careful about that.
Thank you, that's helpful. And
sorry,
Michael's back again. Welcome, Mike. Welcome back, Michael.
It was a brief commercial break. I thought I was on ITV for a minute. What I wanted to ask you, Michael, I've expressed for some time concern about our commercial portfolio. Obviously, we're aware of the extraordinary changes that have happened in the market. And as you know, John Lewis reported recently a significant down valuation within their store group. Can we make sure in the business plan that we have an update to get a real grip on what's happening? Because things have changed dramatically in the last 18 months, not just because of COVID, but because of structural changes in consumer behaviour.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we addressed when we was looking at the investment strategy. Some of the decisions we made, there was not a detailed piece of work around that, but it's something obviously that's on watch. And I think Andrew pointed out that Hyman's as our investment advisors were keeping that particular portfolio on watch for a number of reasons, not only because of the things that you've just mentioned, but also change of personnel, etc., managing that portfolio. So.
Okay, that's fine. That's helpful.
Okay. Does anyone want to come back on the other points I made about responsible investment officers?
Jonathan's waving his hand.
Thank you, Chair. Jonathan here.
Oh, Jonathan. Yeah. Hi.
Thank you very much. Just to go back to what Ben was saying earlier, I mean, more and more overlay of administrative expense and responsible officers is a burden to the pension fund. Can I remind you, as scheme member representative, I'm echoing what Henry said earlier, we need to close that funding gap. We should not be overlaying existing areas of activity with further council officers. Thank you.
Councillor Chapman, we're struggling to hear you, I'm afraid.
Michael, this might be your moment of glory to step in.
I was just thinking about that. Where has he gone? Is he off the line?
It's frozen.
All right. Well, let's move on to the next item on the agenda, and he can join us when we return. Which is the next one?
It's the quarterly update report.
Quarterly update reports. All right, Michael, do you want to introduce that?
Sorry, it's not been approved yet. The last agenda item needs to be approved.
All right, so we've got under 2.1 that we're recommended to approve the business plan and the related decisions. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, let's move on to the next thing. Michael, do you want to introduce it?
Yeah, I largely set out really the quarterly update report. This provides the usual update on key quarterly performance measures, including our funding position, funny enough, as we've just spoke about, governance of the fund and investment performance. There's also some sections around responsible investment, in particular lapse engagement that they've taken over the last quarter, and admin performance. I think in terms of some of the main updates, so funding, as I've just spoke about, after falling down to 87.7% at the end of September, we've actually recovered back to 92%. Obviously, the market's very volatile at the moment, but it's pleasing to see it. We're back to that, that level of funding. I think the responsible investment update. I was just going to update on the major projects. We spoke about McLeod, so I won't talk about that one again. But GMP, we brought back to the last, it may have been the one before, agreeing where we brought back the statistics on who was affected or numbers affected, etc. And the fact that we were hoping to get payments, under and over payments sorted before pensions increase in April. Now, unfortunately, that hasn't been possible. Equinity, the third-party administrators, have just not been able to get the processes through the system ahead of pensions increase, and they felt it was too risky to actually do that process at the same time as implementing the annual pensions increase. So it's a little bit disappointing, but it does give more time around comms to people that are actually affected by it. So I'm going to be taking that forward and actually making sure payments, both for overpayments and underpayments, are actually sorted by July. I've mentioned earlier on the pensions data service. That was the interface. and I'm pleased to say that we actually look as if we're actually, after I've come to many committees and boards, I think, over the years, explaining the problems we've had with pensions data. And I'm pleased to say, as I've mentioned earlier, we have actually got a test file now that seems to be, that is working its way through and is looking very hopeful in terms of being able to help us with, get much more accurate data, timely, which is particularly important for ABSs. Other than that, I'll leave this report as read.
All right, thank you, Michael. I'll pass back to the chair in a minute, but can I just ask, when the last time we got to this very high level of coverage? Because it seems to me that this is the best figure I can remember for several years.
It's pretty much around the level that we was at when we did the triennial evaluation last year. Actually, we're back to that level. But obviously, it is a consideration that we need to take, and we've discussed in previous committees about de-risking, and I think we're obviously doing some of that through the investment strategy, reducing our exposure to equities, etc.
Okay. Any questions at all from anyone? All right. Can we agree that report? And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Rob, for number 9.
Thank you, Michael. Sorry about that. I got kicked out. Can I just on the item on the business plan, and just what I was saying as the end, the discussion about resourcing for responsible investment, which all I said was really we should pick that up as part of our considerations of responsible investment policy in June, and obviously we note the interest and issues that are raised under that area. On the report we've just dealt with, I just wanted to make the point in there. You talked about the good governance guide from the scheme advisory board. No, it's worth looking at that. Some items in there. As you said, there's a timetable, a model time. Is interested to see what.
Can I recommend that Councillor Desmond takes over chairing while Councillor Chapman's Wi-Fi is so bad? It's quite hard to hear what's going on.
You can't hear me at all. Okay.
Well, we're hearing about 1 second in 3.
All right. Okay. Then I'll try. So, Michael, would you want to take over again, and I'll log out.
Become a bit. I think we can hear you now. Have another go, and otherwise I will take over.
Maybe also turn the camera off.
Yeah, that might help.
Turn the camera off.
No, hasn't done any good. All right, I'll take over for item 9. So this is the custodian contract extension. Who was going to talk on this?
But item 9 we were going to take at the end of the meeting because it's under exempt.
Okay. So
I think we were due to have a break. I don't know whether we're still.
Are we due another break? I'll have to get some shares in KitKat.
1 an hour.
All right, let's have another break and hopefully Rob will be back. Let's have a 5-minute break. Thanks very much.
So, sorry, are we just starting it then, or are we?
Just starting it, and number 9 is an exempt item we're going to take at the end.
Okay, Michael. Have you introduced this the public report?
No, so I was just going to make it easy so we don't have to go in there with exempt. I was going to introduce item 10 and 11 together.
Would you want to do that then?
Yeah, indeed. So item 10 is basically the implementation strategy the timetable for the investment strategy implementation. Basically setting out the movement, all the changes that have been agreed over the last couple of committees, etc., and setting out an implementation timetable for those. And obviously stating that we will provide a quarterly update to committee on the progress of that implementation. And then and Andrew's going to really talk to us about the main detail of that in the exempt session. Item 11 then is the private lending performance update. I think as part of when we were discussing the investment strategy, members asked for an update on the private lending mandates, and again, I think Ian from Hymans is going to take us through that, the exempt appendix on that, to provide that update that was requested. So I've got nothing else to say at this point. So
it's one of those cases where the reports are on the public agenda and all the appendices on the private ones, are they? Is that the way it works? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so we're halfway through 10 and 11, so we need then to go. I'm taking that means we need now to go into the exempt bit. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So can we agree to exclude the press and public?
Agreed.
Yep. Okay. Press and public excluded. So.